Switch you over to this.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Color of Fandom VCon 2026. We are honored to have Jeremy Whitley with us today. We're going to be interviewing him, talking about his writing, talking about themes, talking about some of his storytelling, and also getting to some insight into some new works that are coming out and some new works that are already out. So, Jeremy, welcome to Color Fandom VCon. Thank you for
Hi.
coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
I do want to give a short bio for Jeremy for those of you who might not be familiar with him. I think, Jeremy, looking at the audience, I think everybody is very familiar with you. Jeremy Whitley is a writer in Durham, North Carolina. He is the writer creator of Princeless, Raven the Pirate Princess, The Dog Night School for Extraterrestrial Girls, and the Stonewall honored Navigating with You, whose upcoming sequel was just announced from Mad Cave. He is also the writer of Marvel's critically acclaimed Unstoppable Wasp and 60 issues of My Little Pony comics. He is also the host of the Progressively Horrified podcast. Ooh, I got to get into that. Where every week they watch a scary movie and break down the progressive, queer, and feminist themes in horror. You can follow him on Blue Sky at jeremywhitley.bsky.social and sign up for his button down newsletter at https buttondown.com/Whitney, Jeremy Whitley. Jeremy, thank you for coming. I have a few questions for you because I have read, in fact, I've gotten Princeless for my nieces and nephews. And so
Mm.
you are sort of like a constant Christmas present that keeps coming. But I do love your themes. Let me just, I can hear, I'm going to stop pause for just a second. Okay, and we've resumed. So I have a few questions to ask you. Some are about your themes, and
Mhm.
some might be about your process. But my first question is, across books like Navigating with You and The Dog Night, amongst others, your characters' identities are central, but not their only defining trait. So how do you approach writing identity as something lived in rather than spotlight?
I think the biggest key for me on a lot of those has been having people to consult, people to talk to, or people even just that I know in real life that are, that have those identities that are dealing with some of the things that, people are in those stories. I think of Nisha and Navigating with You in particular, because, she has a disability that I do not have. Um, and that was a thing that I asked a lot of questions about, just because I wanted to make sure that there are big things I think we think about when it comes to people who are dealing with things that are not the same things we are. But I think one thing that a lot of people miss, who aren't, say, dealing with, who are writing a race or a disability or a culture that aren't their own, is often sort of the everyday little parts of that lived experience of that life. Um, you see a lot of movies that are about racism or about disability in which like that is the main defining feature of often not only that character dealing with it, but all of the people they deal with that are in some way discriminatory against them. Uh, Whereas I think in real life, uh, people are people. They have to deal with a lot of day-to-day things, whether, that's the case of things that are specific to their situation, like microaggressions. I think, um, you know, the things that a disabled person has to deal with on a daily basis, especially going through a school, be it high school or college, the things that people don't think about when they construct those spaces or when they hold meetings or whatever in those spaces are all things I wanted to make sure were sort of touched on, but especially with, navigating with you, it is in particular a romance, and I wanted to have that romance story front and center, but it to be a story that, our protagonist is disabled, and that is reflected in things she is going throughout that story. So I think talking to people and paying attention and considering all the little ways in which any change in your identity reflects the change in what you go through every day.
Okay, thank you. So you, a lot of your stories, of course, your stories are for young readers, especially I've noticed with your work, especially queer kids or kids of color,
Mhm.
and they see themselves, seeing themselves in these stories can be very transformational. Have you heard from readers who connected with your characters in a way that surprised or stayed with you?
Oh, absolutely. I've had a lot of experiences doing conventions. One of the things I love about conventions is a lot of creators who have been at this longer than I have, or who are more, I think, sort of well known, especially in the superhero circles, will get a lot of people coming to their table at a show, and a lot of those people will have nitpicks or problems or questions about things, and I'll see those guys get very exhausted over the course of the day, whereas I get a lot of like younger readers that are very excited to meet me and very excited to talk to me. I remember in particular, I did one of the first signings I did with Princeless. I did at a show up in College Park in Maryland, at a comic store up there. And I remember a young black girl coming into that signing, and she was like, I have a couple of questions. Can I ask you a couple of questions? And I was like, yeah, sure. And she just like pulled out a full yellow legal notepad and was like, okay, so Adrian does this, this, and this. And I was like, wow, this is intense. She's really into it. And I think like that is something that's really stuck with me. And I think every book I write now, I try to think of like what's some way that we can play against type, that we can do a character that I haven't seen in something that's different, and that's interesting, something that somebody's going to react to in that same sort of way. I think one of the biggest ones for me recently has been, I wrote a story in for Marvel where Gwenpool came out as being asexual, and it's sort of about her process of figuring that out for herself too. Um, and that I think is an identity that people are not used to seeing in any media, just because I think especially for a corporate IP or something like that, people are uh, worried about cutting off the potential for future stories, right? And that's the way they see asexuality in a story as well. If she's asexual, then we can't tell a romance story about her. Um, but like Marvel went ahead with that one with us, and it came out really well, I thought. And I had a lot of people that have come up to me at shows and reacted very strongly to that one, very excited to talk about it. That had never seen themselves reflected in a thing, or uh, in some instances, even that was one where I had a lot of people either contact me online or in person and say like, oh, this helped me figure out something about myself that I wasn't aware of or didn't fully understand. And that's incredible.
Thank you. And so this question kind of goes along with that one. When you're developing a new project, how early in the process do questions of identity, like race, gender, sexuality, physical and mental ability, enter into character creation? Are those starting points, or do they evolve as the story takes shape?
I mean, they're pretty immediate for me. It's definitely something that can evolve, that can change a bit. Especially if I'm dealing with um something that already exists, whether it be a pitch or a concept or an ongoing IP, where I want to think of like what's something I can do in here that I haven't seen done in this story, or with this process, and what's a way that this can be different. Um, I think in the case of navigating with you, it was pretty immediate because they talking to Mad Cave, they wanted to do a romance book, and they had this idea that is sort of central to the plot of the two of them bonding over a manga that they're both really interested in, they both really loved. Um, and they didn't have the genders or races or anything of characters figured out. Um, and I was like, well, if we're doing a romance story, I want to do something that isn't like 100 other books that are going to come out this season. Um, And I think the biggest and most central thing to me was like I want to do a story where, we have a romance where the lead is disabled. Um, because I think that is such a rare bit of representation in stories as um we so rarely see disabled characters in positions where they are discussed as being desirable or having interest in romance or anything like that. And this was, an opportunity where they had sort of the basics in there, and I wanted to do something that when I was writing Unstoppable Wasp over at Marvel, I had created a character who had CP in that story and had um, started working with a consultant who was a comics reader who also had CP, who was very excited about it. And this I thought was a cool opportunity to like make to use that same information, to use that same consultant to center a story with disability, whereas that character in Wasp was sort of part of a supporting cast. Um,
Mhm.
so that was sort of immediate for me. I tend to base a lot of what I want to do with a story on characters. Characters are pretty much first for me. A lot of people are very plot driven or idea driven. For me, it's like the characters come first, and I might have an idea of conceptually what I want to do or the genre I'm in or something like that. But like before I start figuring out plot, I always get in there and figure out who those characters are. And I think that shapes a lot of how the plot goes going forward.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. So the comics and graphic novel space has become more inclusive over time, but it still has gaps. Where do you see the biggest opportunities right now for stories about intersectional identities?
Ooh. Um, I think it's interesting because when Princeless started coming out, which was almost 15 years ago now, there was almost nothing with young black girls in it in the comic space. Um, it was unusual to the point of some publishers were just like, we don't know if that'll sell. We don't know if there's any interest in it. Um, but I think that has definitely spread out, and I think we're seeing especially in the YA space, more room for queer stories as well. I'm hoping that doesn't retract in response to the current sort of political environment and the number of people trying to get books banned. Um, I do still think there's definitely room in areas of disability. Um, because there's so few stories that center disabled characters, and I think a lot of people tend to think of it as being hard to write uh, disabled characters and not do it poorly. Um, but I think that's part of the job. That's you should be willing to research things that make your story better, the same way you would if you were writing it about World War II. You wouldn't just make stuff up. Um, so I think there's definitely stuff around areas of disability and um, mental illness as well, I think is a big thing where I think we're starting to see more books um, that that deal with that in a more sort of interesting and comprehensive way. And I'd love to see more of those. Um, and yeah, I think there's still plenty of room with questions of uh, race and sexuality and things like that. I think it's just trying to create characters that are real and sort of reflective of what real life is and what real people are going through, rather than uh, trying to do a thing because it will sell. Um, I think that is always a trap, is when you try to do some sort of diversity because you think it will sell, you think it's what people want. Because I think then you tend to not do a very good job of writing those characters, and um, then nobody wants bad representation.
Mhm.
Um,
Do you think that
yeah,
might be a distinguishing thing that might I don't know, when we think of AI becoming a part of the conversation too, do you think the fact of being able to recognize good representation and not so good representation, do you think AI might even be a part of that conversation too?
Oh, I think I think using AI in writing and basically anyway, especially when it comes to fiction, is an abysmal idea. Um, because it's there's nothing that a computer can tell you about being a human. Like there's nothing that it can tell you that will make the story better. I think a lot of people have said some version of like if you couldn't be bothered to write it, then I can't be bothered to read it, which I think is something that makes a lot of sense to me. Like if um I I think AI is such a wrong-headed idea when it comes to writing because I think I mean writing is so hard and is so difficult to be good at and pays so poorly. You've especially if you're writing, if you're not super successful, if you're not Stephen King, if you're not screenwriting, uh, that like it's one of those things that people do because they have to. Like they have a story that they have to get out. Um, I think, I have quotes on my wall in here, but one of the ones that stays up here is Maya Angelou said, "There's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." Um, and I think that is quintessential to writing, right? People who write stories, who write even fiction, write because they have to. They have a desire to tell stories, and there's nothing more, I think, quintessentially human than telling stories. And I think trying to program a computer to do that is like, first of all, why? Like, why would you do that? That's what humans do. But like, secondly, it has a computer has no lived experience. It has nothing new to add to the conversation. That's sort of how LLMs work, is they can't add anything new. They can only work from the things that are already there. So I don't know. Representation, I think, is about specificity. It's about um, because I think some people write characters that they think are diverse with the hope that like um, the more broad they write them, the more people will relate. And I think it's actually the opposite, is the more specific and strange people and characters are, the more people relate to them, the stronger they see themselves in them, as compared to something that feels like a broad version of a type of person that, somebody wants to represent.
Yeah, I've noticed that in some writings where there's a character that might be black, and of course, in most books, they're going to tell you that it's the black character. It's not
Mm.
just the character. But the only thing that makes them black to me is that they were labeled the black character. There's nothing about this character that has a semblance. It's an every person character. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I understand what you mean there. Yeah. So looking at the length of time. So you've been writing for a while, and like you said, it is not an easy job at all. Thinking of where you were early in your career, middle career to maybe now, what would you like to explore or have been exploring more emotionally or culturally that you couldn't do earlier in
Mm.
your career?
It's interesting. Um, I think I think when I first started, um, I was very tied to the idea of sort of getting to telling superhero stories, getting to writing for, the big two as sort of a big goal. Um, and I've found that like while I'm able to do some interesting stuff in there, and while I'm able to occasionally tell stories and create characters that I'm really proud of and really enjoy doing, there's a lot of bumping into the walls there where you start to explore this avenue, or you want to do a truly like emotional story, and there's only so much that they'll let you do with the characters that they own, even if you create them. Sometimes it's difficult to do something really original, um, or to do something that isn't action based. Um, and I think navigating with you was an interesting experience, and I think changed my perspective a lot because it's the first story I've written where there wasn't like really central action, right? Um, Being a romance, there was sort of like me figuring out what the beats are to that, where like, there's no point in that where there's gonna be a big fight. Um, and I really enjoyed sort of writing more emotional stuff there. So I think I've really wanted to do more with both um, both romance and horror in recent years, because I think, and we talk about this a lot on my podcast, Progressively Horrified. I think there's a lot of ways in horror to discuss and look at the ways that you feel and ways that the world is that are not so easy to discuss directly or that are hard to put a label on. Um, Whereas, if you're doing that story with a monster or a werewolf or a vampire or any number of other strange ways we tell those stories, I think you're able to sometimes hit on things and um, access emotions both in yourself and in people, um, that are pretty unique to horror and allow you to do some unusual things, both plot-wise and emotionally.
Well, you juggle a lot of projects at the same time. And so, how do you shift your storytelling? And we've talked about how important that is, storytelling is. How do you shift your storytelling voice between sci fi, fairy tale remix, contemporary realism, you know, superhero, a lot of different types of genres? How do you shift that?
I mean, for me, in a lot of cases, that's fun. Like, that's the thing that I like about writing that isn't the case with like I've had jobs in sales, um, where like every day I go to work, I'm doing a different thing. I'm doing, coming at things slightly differently, getting in a different headspace, working with a different set of tools. And it's nice to get to, come into my office and do something completely different today than I did yesterday, and be in a whole different headspace. And I think sometimes they help each other in ways that I don't necessarily anticipate. Um, so that's a really fun thing. I was actually just talking recently. Gail Simone was commenting on a similar issue that she had had of writing multiple things at the same time. And I was talking about there being one point a few years back where I was writing My Little Pony and Vampirella at the same time. Um, which I said, it's not something that it's easy to switch directly between both the material and the feeling of it. Um, so I sometimes you got to just get up and go take a walk and think about stuff or read things that are sort of more in the genre of what you're changing to. Sometimes you got to, read or watch some other media, which is always something I think writers should be doing. Not every writer does, but you should be sort of keeping up with other stuff that people are making and other things that they're doing, um, and reading stories from the type of genres and sometimes the type of people that you hope to represent in your stories. I think it goes a long way to making your own stuff better. So yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of getting up and walking around, just, going and doing something else for a while, or consuming other pieces of media that are in sort of that same genre you're working in, and give your brain a chance to shift over to that.
Okay, thank you. So you also in juggling all these projects, you often play with and invert classic tropes, like in the Dashing School for Wayward Princes. What tropes are you most excited to break right
Oh. Um, hmm. That's a good question. Dashing School is just chock full of tropes.
now?
And it's about sort of uh princes being taught to be toxic. Um,
Mhm.
and that is I've spent a lot of time, especially with Princeless, talking about um uh, about girls learning to be themselves and about feminism and about you know, sort of exploring what who you are and who you can be as a girl. And I think there's a lot more I would like to do with that with boys as well. I think um, I've unprogressively horrified at one point with a lot of points we've talked about how um, feminism isn't always in a piece of media isn't always about uh, just one set of things, and it's not always about women. Sometimes part of feminism is how toxic masculinity also affects guys and how it creates these archetypes and stereotypes that the guys feel they have to fit into and creates these pressures on boys to be things that they aren't or don't want to be. Um, and that, part of feminism is making that opportunity and that space open for boys to have feelings, for boys to uh, do things that are not in line with the this traditional values that we hold to be part of masculinity. Um, and that's something that I would really like to explore more of and talk more about is um, you know, boys sort of finding or men for that matter finding their own version of what it means to be guys and what it means to be masculine. Um, because I think there's this I don't know, we're at a point where gender is widened so much and changed so much and become fluid for a lot of people. But I think uh there's a certain understanding of guys that's still so limited and so locking into, I mean, especially teenage boys and what they can do and what they can be. Um, that I'd like to see more sort of that expanding in the same way that I think is intuitive to us for girls, is that, girls should be able to do more things. And it's not that boys necessarily aren't legally allowed to do them in the ways that girls have often not been, but that they're discouraged and that those pathways are closed by society or by parents in ways that are not always as easily perceived, but I think definitely affect the way that those boys grow into men and what sort of men they grow into.
I think that's why that miniseries Adolescence that was on Netflix did so well, because that has been a neglected group in this type of this type of exploration in feminism and also in toxic masculinity and all that stuff. It seems like boys have been left out of it in a way. Um, and so that was one of the things that changed at our school is there's always the talk before the seniors go to college about how to be safe and things like that. But there was never anything that was given to boys. And so
Yeah.
they need that also, and so I
And
definitely understand with me.
they have to learn from somewhere. And if it's not from
Right.
society, then or I mean, if it's not from a person, if it's not from parents, if it's not from stories, then it's going to be from other guys, some of whom are, not don't have the best ideas about who guys are and what they should be able to do. And yeah, I mean, Dashing School is a lot about that to start with, I think. And,
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to see uh, more sort of stories about, boys getting into things that are traditionally more domestic and, um, having the option to have different kinds of stories themselves. Because I think that um, traditional masculinity model is something that is really hard to break once it's often beaten into people.
Yeah, sure. Well, this kind of, I guess all of my questions kind of tie in together. This one's about People often, you hear creators and writers, but it can also be in other media talking about writing for the reader or creating for the reader that you needed when you were growing up. Does that resonate with you, that idea of you write for the person you needed to be reading or something like that? And especially, do you find that if it does resonate with you, especially in your inclusive storytelling?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like I grew up in uh a fairly rural part of North Carolina, where I had only sort of certain types of people as friends, and I think a certain type of very like Christian centered world with, you know, uh, Lenore where I lived is mostly black, white, and increasingly Latino. Um, but that is, I think, sort of. Uh, I always wanted to get into more sort of people's heads and see what life was like for other people in a way that like is not readily accessible when you're living in an area like that. And I think having more kinds of stories that um, explore those things and um, you know let you see the world through different people's points of views, I think open up a lot of what's possible for you. Um, I was very struck by this is at least 10 years ago now, back when I was um, working on Princeless initially, that I had a lot of parents that were very excited to buy it for their daughters, their nieces, their uh, whatever female relative. But I had this one mom that came to me and was just like, I wanted to thank you for this because um, there's so few adventure books with female protagonists where my son can see girls represented this way. Um, and saying how important she thinks it is for boys to be able to see people, or for I guess anybody to be able to see people who are not like them as heroes, um, and how much the media I think influences your idea or collective ideas of who can be heroes and who are villains. Um, and I think having that sort of diversity goes a long way to helping you sort of understand those people and be able to see other people in unique ways. And that is definitely something I would have liked to have had. And I think, also as a teenager, I was sort of, I mean, I've always been a little socially awkward, but particularly in high school, like I was always just I was terrified of girls I thought were pretty. And I think the older I get and the more women I know and the more books I read about uh, teenage girls written by, adult women who went through that stuff, the more I'm like, oh, they were also terrified. Like
Mhm.
all the girls were also terrified and horny and going through all the same crazy things that I was going through that I just thought were all in my head. Um, and I think like it's really it would really have been a relief, I think, to me as a teenager to know that like the girls were all going through the same things. Like they might have expressed a little differently, and they might have, uh, been pushed in different directions as to how they could express them physically. But yeah, they were all everybody's freaking out.
Everybody's feeling the same. Everybody's
Yeah,
teenage. Yeah.
absolutely.
So if you could revisit Princeless, so think about early days. If you could revisit Princeless today with everything you've learned, what would you do differently, or what would you double down on?
Hmm. Um,
Or maybe not do anything at all. That could be an option too.
I think I have a better understanding of things like gender and sexuality that I did then than I did then. And I don't know that there's anything directly I would change other than maybe finding a different publisher. Um, because we unfortunately had a lot of issues with Action Lab, which is sort of the reason that Princeless is so far somewhat famously unfinished, I think. Um,
Oh,
but we're working on that. Um, so that definitely would have been a change. I think I would have been better at formatting the story. I definitely think I understand writing comics a lot better than I did when I started writing Princeless. I do go back and look at those issues now and think like I feel like I had a pretty good handle on that. I feel like
Mhm.
thinking about it now, I'm always like, oh, I had no idea what I was doing back then. But I go back and read the issues and I'm like, no, I did okay. It was all right. It's not as bad as I expected it to be. Um,
Well, good.
but yeah, I think having a better concept of um of how long it would be better, how long anything would take about comics. Um, because I think that's one of the hardest parts going in is just sort of estimating how hard it's going to be and how long it's going to take. Um, because you can't understand that until you've gone through it. And it takes so much to make a comic, and I think it is a small miracle anytime a comic
Yeah.
actually makes it onto the shelf at all. Um, I don't think that single issue format was sort of the ideal way to make Princeless.
Mhm.
But I think graphic novels for middle grades were not a thing that exists in the same way that they exist now. Um, so it's hard to think how we could have done it differently, um, while also being in a system and a future that to some extent we helped create, you know? Because it's there was so very few models to go by at that point. Um,
Yeah.
you know, the stuff that was coming out at the same time that ended up, you know, becoming graphic novels and doing super well, like Raina Telgemeier's stuff, also didn't start out being graphic novels. They started out being web comics that she was just doing for fun and trying to build something. And I think we all got to the same place eventually, and we sort of had to drag publishers there to some extent.
Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for answering my questions. Now I want to give you time. Tell us, what are you doing? What are you working on? What is going to be coming out soon?
Oh, so I've got stuff I can talk about and stuff I can't talk about, of course.
Whatever you can
Um,
talk about, whatever you're good talking about.
yeah, so I just ran a crowdfunding campaign for two books called Slay and the Girlfriend Survives, which are both more mature, bloody adult titles. So we're trying to do something a little bit different there. I'm hoping to find a home for those after the first issues, because the first issue of both of those are done. We just need to finish up formatting stuff and get them printed and off to people. I'm very excited about both of those. Um, we have the third book of my trilogy with Jamie Noguchi, The School for Extraterrestrial Girls. The third book of that is coming out in May. It's available for pre-order right now, so people can check that out for sure. They just announced the uh, sequel to Navigating with You coming out from Mad Cave and Maverick, um, which was always something I wanted to do, but not always something I was sure would happen. But thanks to the sales and acclaim for that book, gave us a chance to tell a second story with those characters and to expand on that world a little bit. Um, which I'm really excited about. The final pages of that are getting colored right now. Um, and I'm excited for people to check that out in that should be like late fall, early winter, I think.
Okay,
Um,
good.
they keep telling me not to say a date because it's still sort of fluid. The exact date. You mentioned Dashing School for Wayward Princes should be out in 2017. That is my hope.
Okay, okay.
Um, that one's still sort of finishing up the art there. That is coming from Simon and Schuster. Um, and then I actually just got the last pencils for what'll be the third volume of the Dog Knight, but the second volume of the Dog Knight is the colors are being finished up right now, and that'll be out early 2027 as well. So got a lot of sequels coming up.
It's a lot coming out. I mean, period. All right, well,
Yeah.
I am going to open up. I'm going to be looking in Discord. Do we have any questions, anybody? I'm just going to give them a few minutes because people type in here. So I see people are typing.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait to read Slay because yeah, that's my line of definitely some horror.
Yeah. I've
Yeah.
been wanting to do more horror stuff.
Mhm.
We talk about uh progressively horrified we still do every week. I guess I should mention that with things that I'm working on.
Yeah.
Um, because basically, we have guests. Occasionally we do it just the three of us, but it's myself and my friends Ben Kahn and Emily Martin, who are
Okay.
also comic creators. Um, and we watch a scary movie every week and we talk about the politics of it, and
Okay.
particularly ways in which horror is can be and sometimes isn't progressive.
Mhm.
But mostly we aim for the more positive representations of progressive things that you can do in horror, because I think they get a
Okay.
bad rap for being sort of regressive when it comes to especially things like gender and sexuality.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's true of a lot of horror.
Yeah. Okay, I do see. Okay, is it hard? I have one person asking, is it hard to write your first book?
Um, yeah, it can be. There are, I think, books that are easier to write than others. What I recommend people, and this sort of popped into my mind when you were asking what I would do differently, because what I tell people at conventions is don't do what I did. Don't start out with your big 10 volume magnum opus thing
Mhm.
that's gonna go on for 10 years, because that's really hard to get a publisher to sign on to, but also it's really hard to use as your sort of calling card as a creator. Um, because I think the best thing you can do is to set your sights on telling a story that you can finish, right? Whether that's something that's 1 page, 5 pages, 10 pages, have something that you can get done, that you can then get out into the world and um, you know you can show to publishers as an example of what your work is like, because publishers will not hire you with no record of creating stuff behind you. Um, so I would say try and find something that is easier to finish. Um, don't necessarily try and go in trying to tell the great American novel idea that you have. I've only just now finished writing the first couple of like prose stories of my own that I want to get out there that are some of one of which at least is extremely long. Um, but I have a lot of, I went into like Princeless trying to write a story that was going to be end up being, let's see, 10 volumes at 4 to 5
Ooh.
issues a piece. So
Oh my
uh
gosh.
yeah, plus short stories is about 60 issues worth of Princeless, plus almost that much on Raven, which is the spin-off to it. So yeah, don't start that way. It's much harder to finish your first book if your first book is epically long. A lot more things can go wrong.
Another question is there a difference between writing for Marvel and writing for smaller presses?
Yes, but it's not always going to be what you think it is. Um, writing for smaller presses, especially if there aren't other books connected to yours, there aren't nearly as many uh, obstacles to run into. Um, I I wrote Wasp, I think, was fairly unique in that we had sort of our own corner we were playing in, that there weren't a lot of other books dealing with those characters, a lot of which I had created. Um, but working on like Future Foundation was incredibly difficult because I was trying to have guest appearances from other characters who kept dying in their other books, so couldn't be in my book, or kept having some other kind of issue. Somebody was using this character in this book, somebody was doing something with this other guy. Um, so, we had to change sort of what we wanted to do with that book a half dozen times before the first issue even came out. Um, and then, every once in a while you run into something that they will tell you you can't do, or that, legal does not like you doing. Um, we uh, I did a story in Unstoppable Wasp where Nadia has a, manic and depressive episodes, um, and those all had to like actually go through Disney legal to make sure that nothing in there they felt like was going to be an issue for them, that there was not going to be a case where somebody sued because they thought, this thing influenced their kid to do whatever. Um, which for the most part ended up being fine. I think the only the only thing they ended up changing was they wanted us to remove actually saying the word suicide at one point. Um, but like it's still sort of implied in there. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I think that's the biggest difference with Marvel or DC is there's so many moving parts around you that you have to learn to sort of zigzag between them. Um, it's less so with something like working on My Little Pony at IDW, there would be some of those obstacles, but not nearly as many, because you're working in that case with uh, both both your publisher and an IP holder, and while the show was on as well, trying to do something that isn't too much like what the show is going to do. And there's a certain amount of being psychic and trying to plan around another creative endeavor that another group of people are doing, where it's like, well, they won't come over here to this area and bother this thing, so that's somewhere that I can pitch ideas. And then every once in a while, I would pitch something and be like, oh, this is almost exactly like something they're going to do on the show, so no, you can't do this.
Mhm. All right. Any other questions? Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for being a part of VCon. Thank you for sharing your work, sharing your process. We are very excited to read your work, see what's coming up, and we just thank you very much for and feel very honored for you to be a part of our interview selection.
Oh, thank you so much. Anytime, I'm really happy to do it, and thank you so much for having me.
And feel free to we have maybe two more VCon things, and we'll still be doing several things with Color of Fandom throughout the Triangle. So we're back on Meetup, so just stay in touch.
All right, well, just let me know.
Okay.